Thank you everyone for joining us for today's Research and Innovation Training Institute session. Our guest today is Donna Polkovic, who is the Director of Research Compliance for the university. Today, Donna is going to present a session, Do You Have Consent? And it's very important that we have informed consent when we're doing human subjects research. And Donna is here to talk to us about everything that we need to know about informed consent. So Donna, as soon as I let everyone know that we are recording this session, and the session will be available on our YouTube channel, which is PVAMU Research. The session will be available there for you to review at a later time, and for those who were not able to be in the session today. So be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can be made aware whenever we load new videos into our account at PVAMU Research, our YouTube channel. So Donna, thank you so much for presenting today. Without further ado, Donna Polkovic.
Well, thank you all for coming today. I know everyone's getting ready for summer finals, so I appreciate it. I'll be talking to y'all today about informed consent. So I will move forward. So first of all, I'd like to describe to y'all the mission of our office. I'm in the Office of Research Compliance, and our mission is to support the research enterprise by facilitating compliance with federal, state, and institutional policy. Our impact is that we facilitate about 70% of the sponsored research at Prairie View and all of the graduate studies, IRBs. So we're very much involved. The services we offer are that we are here to train you in the ethics of human, animal, and biohazard research, that we facilitate ethics approvals for human, animal, and biohazard research, and that we assist researchers in preparation of descriptions of their research for approval. And we do much more than that, but that's just kind of a big overview. So, what is informed consent? Well, informed consent means that human subjects understand the important implications of the decision to participate in research, and they actively agree to participate in the research. So, right out of the gate, I have a quiz question for you. Is the informed consent simply a document that a human subject signs when they agree to participate in a research study? Yes or no? You don't have to answer me, just think about it for a minute. I'll give you a few seconds to come up with an answer. Is the informed consent simply a document that a human subject signs when they agree to participate in a research study? The answer is no, it's not. It may seem that way. However, it's more than just a document. Informed consent is a process. It starts when you recruit your subjects, when they do sign whatever consent form or read your information about the study. That, of course, needs to be done without undue influence or coercion. If they have any questions, they should be able to dialogue with you through the entire study. You basically, from beginning to end, there should be a consent process. So, no, it isn't just a document. All right. So, why is it required? Why is informed consent required? Well, this picture you see on the screen is kind of the front page of the Belmont Report. So the Belmont Report is a document named after the Belmont Conference Center in Maryland, where a government-appointed group of experts met in the 1970s and came up with the three major ethical principles for human subjects research. And if y'all are, I'm sure, all aware of the syphilis study in Tuskegee and several other studies that brought to the horror of the nation things that can happen if you are not ethical in your human subjects research. So this group, this commission, wrote this 8 or 9 page document called the Belmont Report, and it establishes the 3 principles used to evaluate the ethics of human subjects research. The first one is respect for persons. That's the first ethical principle. So what is that? That is, to have respect for persons means that you treat individuals as autonomous agents, able of determining their own destiny. They're available of self-determination, basically. It also means that you protect people with diminished autonomy. And we'll talk about those groups here in just a second. The second principle is beneficence. And we won't talk about that today a whole lot. But basically, it's do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And the third principle is justice. And when we talk about justice, we mean distributing the risks and benefits of the research equally among those who may benefit. So in the past, for example, a lot of biomedical research was done on prisoners. And the prisoners weren't necessarily the beneficiaries of the research. So it was being done for healthy, non-incarcerated people at, you can argue, the detriment of prisoners. They were being treated like throwaway people, lab rats, you might say. So justice means the people who benefit from it are the ones who should also take on the risk. So next. There are 4 conditions that flow directly from respect for persons. Those are that there is voluntary consent to participate in the research. So people should give their consent. They choose to participate in your research. That there is an informed consent to participate. They need to know what they're getting into. Number 3, you protect their privacy and their confidentiality. And number 4, that they have the right to withdraw from your research without penalty. So that leads us to an ethical question. Okay. So I'm going to go through each of the examples here, and you can think to yourselves about the answer to it. So this ethical question: select the individuals below that may have diminished autonomy, basically may not be able to make decisions for themselves, and may require additional protections before they participate in your research study. So the first example is a 17-year-old male in the state of Texas. Do you think that this person has diminished autonomy? Give y'all a second to think about that. Well, the answer is yes, because the age of majority in Texas is 18 years. So anyone under the age of 18 is considered a minor or a child in the state of Texas. So that individual could not agree to be in your research study without parental consent, because the parent is the person deciding whether or not, ultimately they can even decide whether they want to participate. So you would get the approval of the parent and the child in this case. And that's very interesting to think about. But children are a protected class. So our next example is a prisoner at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville, Texas. Does this person have diminished autonomy? Think about that for a minute. Does a prisoner at the Texas State Penitentiary have diminished autonomy? And the answer is absolutely. They're incarcerated. They do not have control over their lives. I mean, they are, you might say, they don't have all the civil liberties that we do, those of us who are not prisoners. And they are, in fact, a protected class under the law. So, yes, they do have diminished autonomy. Next example, an unconscious cardiac patient in the emergency room at the Houston Methodist Hospital. Does that person have diminished autonomy and need extra protections? Think about that for a minute. So you have an unconscious cardiac patient in the emergency room. And the answer to that one is yes, they do, because they aren't conscious to give their consent to take on an experimental treatment. They may have given the authority to a loved one to do that, but they themselves would have diminished autonomy in that situation. So as a researcher, you can't just step in and give them an experimental treatment. They can't agree to it. Now, they may have allowed, through a power of attorney, someone else to do that, but they themselves cannot. So, yes, they do. Next person. Let's say I have I live in a middle-class neighborhood, and my neighbor, friendly neighbor next door, who has an IQ of 50, so maybe not the brightest person, do they have diminished autonomy? Does my neighbor with a lower IQ have diminished autonomy? I'll give you a second to think about that. The answer is, it depends. So an IQ of 50, I believe psychologists consider to be moderately mentally retarded. So if you were to ask this person if they like Coke better than Pepsi, you're probably fine to do that research, because they could easily give you an opinion of, yes, I like Coke better than Pepsi, or no, I like Pepsi better than Coke. But if you were to ask them some questions that they perhaps don't understand, for example, if you said something to them like, well, how would you react if the world was going to end tomorrow? They might actually think the world's going to end tomorrow, because you just said that. So, because their IQ is not that high. Well, you have to consider those things when you're going after certain target populations. So in this situation, it would all depend. But it's something that we think about, the IRB has to think about when they're giving approvals. And another example, let's say you have a homeless person with an IQ of 125. Does this person have diminished autonomy? Think about this. So you have a homeless person with an IQ of 125. And the answer to that would be yes, in certain situations. Yes, because let's say you were offering $50 to participate in your study. To the rest of us, that may not be very much, but to a homeless person, that's a lot of money. So that would be a financial coerciveness to participate in the study. That's another, it depends. It's all relative. This person may be perfectly able to think for themselves, but because of their situation, they may be vulnerable to coercion. So last example, and the one I find perhaps the most fascinating, is a pregnant woman. Does anyone think that a pregnant woman has diminished autonomy and may require additional protections before they participate in research? And the answer is, they are a protected class. So yes, kind of. And I know this one's kind of shocking to me, but in reading the law, and I just read the law again before this presentation, if a pregnant woman was considering a research treatment that would benefit herself and her child, both, or would benefit herself and her child, she could consent to it. But if the treatment benefited only the child, she has to get the father's permission as well. Basically, the father and she both have to give permission. To me, that kind of smacks of not having autonomy. Why, if I want to sacrifice myself for the sake of my unborn child, why do I need the father's approval? I don't understand that. Yet it's in the law. So, thing to take away from this is pregnant women, neonates, fetuses, children, and prisoners are all protected classes. So you need to consider that with consents. You're going to have more work to do to get consent from them. Doesn't mean you can't do the research. You just need to do more work. And anyone who may be, by virtue of their situation, vulnerable they cannot make self-determination. So those groups you need to be careful with. So I'll move on. And by the way, there will be questions and answers at the end of this. So if you have any questions about any of these things, save them up and I'll happily answer. So what do you need to include in the informed consent document? This picture on your screen is our template. It's available on the IRB website. First, you need to describe your research purpose or procedures, which you may see is right here. We have this group right here, procedures. Risks and discomforts, down here. You describe the risks, which Hopefully are no greater than everyday life, but they may be. And potential benefits, you also describe those right here. Additional things you need to have is provisions for confidentiality, which is right here, also in page 2 of the document, which is displayed. Contacts for additional information. You'll give your contact, and we usually give our office contact. I'm listed there, but in essence, a third party if they don't want to talk to you. And there has to be a note for the voluntary nature of the study. So people have to be able to discontinue without penalty or not partake in the research at all. So that all goes back to the autonomy. They have to be self-determining, make their own decisions. And there are other things that need to be included. Generally, these are in biomedical experiments, but if they apply to your research, you need to include them. One is any alternative procedures or treatments other than what you're proposing here. The management of any research-related injuries that could occur. Any unforeseeable risks. Now that's interesting. Not exactly sure how you would describe an unforeseeable risk, but I believe there's a way. Termination of participation by the investigator. If you had to terminate their participation, you need to explain that. Any additional costs that they would have. For example, if they had to come to the hospital once a week, you need to say you're going to have to find a way to get to the hospital every week for 3 months. Consequences of discontinuing the research participation. That needs to be clearly outlined. Perhaps there would be side effects. Notification of significant new findings. So in the middle of the research study, if you find out that people who are taking your research medication are getting very sick, if they have diabetes, then you need to notify everyone of that. They may say, whoa, I don't want to participate anymore, I have diabetes. So that's something you need to tell them. And the approximate number of subjects. So those are all maybes depending on what you're doing. Typically, you see them in biomedical research. Next, the informed consent document versus the information sheet. Some of you have heard the term information sheet. So what is the difference between that? So I'll test you on that question right now. What's the difference between the informed consent document and an information sheet? Is it A, that the risks are not disclosed in the information sheet? Is it B, that the contact information is not required on an information sheet? Or is it C, that signatures are not required on an information sheet? And the answer is C. You don't have to have signatures on the info sheet. So here on your side screen here is the statement of consent from our regular consent form. As you see, there's all signatures here. That is an informed consent document. This below here is the info sheet. So it's the exact same thing as the informed consent document. The difference being that all you have to do is click a box to move forward if you want to participate. In the statement of consent, you need signatures, and you have to retain those signatures for 3 years. But for the statement of consent, they can just check the box and go on. That's the difference. So when do you use the informed consent document and when do you use the information sheet? So an information sheet, you want to use that for minimal risk studies. That is risks being no greater than everyday life. So your simple online survey probably is going to be minimal risk, and an info sheet would be appropriate. In informed consent, you want to use those definitely for greater than minimal risk type studies. So an information sheet, online surveys, non-sensitive topics, informed consent, children, prisoners, pregnant women, sensitive topics like maybe drug use, you definitely want to use it there. So what if having the subject sign that informed consent document places the subject at greater risk? Don't panic. The answer is you can ask the IRB for a waiver of documentation of informed consent. So when would this be relevant? let's say you're studying drug use and you want people to admit that they've used crack cocaine in the last week. Okay, they're signing the consent document, identifies them by name as having answered these questions because they're going to be in your study. So the risk to them would be that law enforcement finds the consent document and comes looking for them to see if they can find drugs in their apartment or something like that. So you don't want them to have to sign the consent document because that places them at greater risk. So you would propose that on the IRB form in this waiver box on page 6. So this is what those waivers are for those of you who fill out the form. So you would ask for the waiver of documentation of informed consent. So basically you're saying, please IRB, give me an approval not to keep the signed consent forms. And the IRB would make that decision. And the way the IRB makes that decision is that they have to determine if the only record linking the subject in the research would be that consent document, and that the main risk is a breach of confidentiality, say if the police found that document, or that the research presents no more than minimal risk of harm to the subject and has no procedures for which a written consent would normally be required. So that's what the IRB is going to have to decide. Okay, next topic is deception. So, question, can a researcher deceive human subjects about the true purpose of a research study? Think about that for a minute. Yes or no? Can you deceive a human subject about the true purpose of a research study? And the answer is yes. But there are conditions. Okay? So, the American Psychological Association has some guidelines on using deception. Psychologists never, and here's their guidelines, they never deceive research participants about significant aspects that would affect their willingness to participate, such as physical risk, discomfort, or unpleasant emotional experiences. And all deceptions have to be disclosed and explained to the participants as early as possible. Some of you have heard the term of the debrief form. That is what that is. So at the end of the study, you let them know the full extent of the research. So in what types of studies is deception common? It's common in studies that evaluate human behavior. In other words, it's not possible to obtain accurate information about how people behave when they know that their behavior is being evaluated. So for example, in a place excuse me, a place I once worked, human subjects were let in and they fill out a survey. And in the meantime, someone in the hallway crashes a ladder. And the real study was not the survey. The real study was to see how many people would go out to help when the ladder was crashed, to see if anyone was hurt, to help. So at the end of that study, they had to tell people, thanks for filling out the survey. But the real study was to see how helpful you are if you went outside. So that was deception. And they did have to debrief. But they couldn't tell people up front, or everybody would run out the room to help if they knew up front. So that's a study of human behavior that could not be in advance described. So can the consent document itself be used as part of the deception? Yes or no? And the answer, think about that. Can you use that consent document as part of the deception? And the answer is no, you cannot. It should never be part of the deception and cannot include anything that is untrue. What you can do is reveal as much as you can without tipping them off to the true nature of the study. However, you don't have to explain all the details so that they can't figure it out. You can explain the rest of it in the debrief form, but you cannot lie to them. You can't use it for the deception. So, to approve a deception study, the IRB will have to determine one of the following. Number one, if the research project is to be conducted or subject to the approval of state or local government officials and it's designed to evaluate, study, or otherwise examine a public benefit program, then the deception's okay. So if you were being paid by the local government to determine or evaluate Medicaid users in the county, and you had to deceive on some level, that is generally approvable. I don't understand why, but it's what's written in the law. or that the research could not practicably be carried out without the waiver. And that's the more common one. The human behavior studies you cannot get a result if you don't proceed. So the IRB will determine this. Okay, next, how do I request IRB approval for a deception study? There's a checkbox. It's the same one, the same waiver box. Now you're asking for a waiver of informed consent, right? Because they can't really give their informed consent because they don't know what the real study is. So if you need that, you check yes here and you describe the deception and why it's necessary that people not know the full nature of the deception up front. Okay. So where can you go for assistance on all these topics? You can call the Office of Research Compliance at 1588. That's my number, my extension. Or you can email us. Our email has changed. It used to be just research@PVAMU. It's now researchcompliance@PVAMU. And here's everyone in my office. That's me, Donna, and Krista, the Associate Director, and Indrika, our Research Compliance Specialist. And that is the presentation today. I can take questions now if anyone would like to, or anyone has a question.
I have a question.
Okay.
So,
Please go ahead.
under these circumstances, if we want to submit an IRB application, do we do it online? I always brought it to your office. I don't know if the option is available to do it. Can I just send it to you?
Well, so the system is purchasing a electronic submission system for all the ethics boards. However, it could be a year or two before that's fully implemented. So right now what you can do, you get the PDF fillable form, you can fill it out, sign it, scan it to us. Or you can send it to us without the signatures if you want us to do a pre-review. But eventually we'll ask you for the signatures. We can put DocuSign on it and send it back to you. But we have that ability. But right now it's a PDF fillable form with attachments for your informed consent and your survey questions. So
Okay.
that will change. Is there anyone else?
Hmm?
Donna, there are often in classroom settings students that are asked to conduct surveys amongst their friends, amongst their colleagues, and oftentimes they may not understand that may be, in some situations, that may be considered human subjects research. How can you, what can you do, what can you speak to about that?
Okay, so I did give a presentation recently on class projects. So here's the thing to remember. It's wonderful that people want to learn research methods and everything in classes, and that's great. And generally speaking, it's okay for you to do that as long as you don't call it research, because intent matters when you're doing that. If it's not risky and your intent is simply educational, meaning you want to ask everyone questions on a certain topic, and the results are only going to be shared in the classroom as an educational project. You're not going to publish it. You're not going to call it research in any way. You're probably fine. However, if you want to, we have stopped some class projects that were riskier. When I say risky, for example, College of Nursing, we saw one once where they wanted to test people's blood sugar readings, then give them an educational presentation on diabetes, controlling your blood sugar, and then test the readings afterwards. That's actually a research project, and you're getting information from people, you're getting data from people that could be used against them if, like, a healthcare found out about it. So the intent there was more research than it was for educational. So yeah, I suggest anyone who has a question, send me an email or send my office an email, and we'll talk to them about it. It's probably okay, but just to be safe, it's always good to check in. We can help.
When in doubt, just ask.
Right, exactly.
Donna, we also have a question. How long does it generally take to get approval?
Okay, so if you're working with deception or a protected class, such as children, prisoners, or pregnant women, neonates, fetuses, give yourself more time. You may end up going to the committee, and really only less than 5% of our protocols go to the full board. And the board meets once a month, usually. So if you want a really sensitive topic, give yourself more time. But 95% of everything we see can be processed in less than 3 weeks.
I'd like to ask everyone to just take a few minutes and just copy paste that Qualtrics link that is in the chat box, because that'll give us some very important feedback on making our RITI sessions better every time for you. We know that you're taking an hour out of your day for the RITI sessions, and we truly appreciate it, and we want to make sure that we bring you information that you want to hear about. Donna, you mentioned that sometimes the subject may be a cause that you may have to go before the committee. Can you talk a little bit about the committee, the various committees, because some people may not know what that means or what that experience is like to go before the committee?
Okay, so if you want to use human beings in your research, animals, or if you want to research on infectious agents, recombinant DNA, or biologically based toxins, things that like snake venom or ricin that came from a biological origin, those things go through the ethics committees before you can get your money and before you can start the research. And that's usually built in, it's definitely built into federal funding. It's a term and condition of your funding. So the example we're going about now, let's say you need to survey people, you have a grant from NSF, and one of the deliverables involves participation outcomes from people, and you have to get an IRB. Well, you will have to come to the IRB and get your approval before post-award can set up your accounts, because NSF's not going to release your funds without proof that you have an approval from the institution's ethics committee. Same with the animals, same with the biohazards. So in the IRB's case, 90-something% of what we do is very low risk. So it's processed by members of the committee, not the whole committee. And so that's why, I mean, it's so much faster. The other two committees, the animals and the biohazards, you should plan a couple of months at least, because those will go to committee for your new protocols. They will take time. You will get comments back. You will need to make, maybe make revisions. That's really kind of the difference.
I'm sorry, does the researcher actually go to the committee meeting and sit there before the committee?
We like to invite them because sometimes it's easier just to get an answer right there. They don't have to, but sometimes it's just easier when questions come up. So we do try to invite people to the meeting.
Okay. Are there any more questions? Great presentation, Donna. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We learned a lot about human subjects and what we need to do to ensure that we remain in compliance, which is very critical. In the chat box, there is a brief survey. Again, I'd like to ask you to complete that survey so that we can make our RITI sessions better and better every time. And I'd also like to remind you that this session will be available on our YouTube channel, which is PVAMU Research. And we'd like to invite you to subscribe to our research YouTube channel. Join us on Wednesday, August 5th, when we'll have the Research Data Blitz, which is presented by the Office of Research Advancement. The Research Data Blitz is from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. It's a 1-hour session. You'll learn about the amazing research and research interests of our researchers right here on campus. And you may find someone that you have an interest and collaborating with. So we thank you for joining us today for the Research and Innovation Training Institute, and we hope that you'll join us on Monday for another great presentation. Thank you.